Absolutely, Chairman. I see this, and I don't mind calling them out, but Captain Traoré and Burkina Faso, as they know that both, whether it's their gold reserves, that is all those proceeds are just in exchange to protect the junta regime. There's a number of examples across. Even in Sudan, what's going on with the rapid support forces and Burhan of the Sudan forces? When you get down to it, is all about the revenue that can be drawn out of that, and there are nefarious actors in the CCP or in sometimes Russia are complicit in those activities.
Okay, well, you can't imagine how frustrating it seems to me that this mineral-rich continent has not been able to.
U.S. General Michael Langley landed quietly in Kenya. By sunset, protests had erupted across Africa. Elders in Senegal denounced him, and social media burned with rage. What did he say? Who did he threaten? And why did the entire continent rise in defense of one man? Let's find out. The streets of Nairobi have seen their fair share of protests, but what unfolded on that humid morning in May 2025 felt different. It wasn't just the signs, the chants, or the sheer energy pulsing through the crowds. It was the tone. There was anger, yes, but beneath it, something more dangerous: betrayal. Only 24 hours earlier, U.S. General Michael Langley had stepped off a military jet onto Kenyan soil, his visit announced in soft diplomatic language. On paper, he was here for a routine summit, another high-level defense conference designed to affirm the U.S. Kenya military ties. Nairobi had hosted dozens of such visits over the years, but this time the welcome mat caught fire. Protesters flooded the streets outside the venue before Langley even made his opening remarks. Kenyan police, caught off guard by the speed and coordination of the demonstrations, scrambled to contain the crowds. Placards read, "Africa is not your base. Langley, who sent you? Component placement, and we stand with Traoré." But what startled even seasoned observers wasn't the anger, it was the coordination. Within hours, solidarity marches erupted in Kampala, Dar es Salaam, and even as far as Freetown. Something had shifted. Because Langley's visit wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was happening in a year when Africa's political soul was under negotiation, when old alliances were cracking, and new ones were being forged with quiet defiance. And whether he knew it or not, Langley had become the symbol of everything many Africans were rejecting. To understand the uproar, one has to look at the optics. On one side, an aging Western general in polished boots and a pressed uniform, flown in to discuss regional security frameworks. On the other hand, a continent weary of being told how to run its affairs, still nursing open wounds from decades of interference, coups, and conditional aid. In the minds of many young Africans, Langley didn't arrive as a diplomat. He arrived as a ghost from the past. And the venue didn't help. The defense summit was held in a luxury hotel draped in American and Kenyan flags, guarded by local police and U.S. Marines in plain sight. Outside, youth leaders and Pan-African groups held megaphones and demanded answers. "We're not against Kenya," one speaker shouted. "We're against puppets who allow our continent to be used like a military chessboard." What stung most for many wasn't just Langley's presence, it was Kenya's silence. No strong statements distancing itself from his previous remarks, no attempt to clarify Nairobi's position. In a year where Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger had declared a bold realignment away from Western powers, Kenya's willingness to host Langley without hesitation looked like a betrayal. A sharp contrast, a line in the sand. And then came the graffiti. The phrase, "Nairobi is not AFRICOM HQ," was painted in red across 2 government walls downtown. Photos went viral within minutes. Artists began projecting digital billboards with phrases like, "Langley brings war, not peace." Within a day, Pan-African influencers across platforms were echoing the same sentiment. This wasn't just a diplomatic visit. This was an attempt to reassert control, dressed up in security talk. And Langley? He remained largely silent during the early uproar. His opening statement at the summit focused on shared counterinsurgency efforts and stability partnerships. delivered in the same language U.S. envoys have used for decades. It was clear, he didn't get it. Or worse, he didn't want to get it. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Behind the scenes, some Kenyan officials expressed discomfort. A leaked memo later revealed that at least 2 senior advisors warned against hosting Langley so soon after his inflammatory remarks about Burkina Faso. But the meeting went ahead anyway, an act seen by many as Nairobi placing defense contracts over dignity. The backlash wasn't orchestrated by governments. It came from the streets, from students, artists, elders, even from former Kenyan diplomats who spoke out publicly for the first time. The noise was organic, fierce, and it wasn't just aimed at Langley, it was a message to the West. Africa is watching. And as the chants echoed through Nairobi and beyond, one name kept returning to the center of the storm. Not Langley, not Trump, not Ruto, but Traoré. Because if Langley's arrival cracked open a wound, it was his attack on Traoré that poured in the salt. The protests weren't just reactive, they were protective. Africans weren't just angry that a general had landed. They were furious that someone had tried to publicly smear the man many saw as Africa's new vanguard. And so, as the protests gained momentum, the continent remembered the words, the accusation, the gold, which leads to the real catalyst behind the rage, Langley's very public war of words with Captain Ibrahim Traoré. The protests didn't erupt merely because a U.S. general came to town. They exploded because that general had done something deeper, something that scratched at the soul of an entire continent. He attacked the wrong man, at the wrong moment, using the wrong language. Captain Ibrahim Traoré isn't just the leader of Burkina Faso. He is, to millions across Africa, a symbol of modern resistance. Young, military-trained, and unafraid of confrontation, Traoré represents a political force that refuses to bow, especially not to former colonial powers or their modern emissaries. And it was this force that General Michael Langley attempted to publicly dismantle from a Senate hearing room in Washington, D.C., long before he ever set foot in Nairobi. In that now infamous testimony, Langley didn't mince words. Captain Traoré is using Burkina Faso's national gold reserves, he said, not for the people, but to fortify his junta. It was a sentence spoken with bureaucratic precision, but it landed across Africa like a bomb. To the U.S. Congress, it may have sounded like strategic analysis, but to Africans, especially the youth and the politically conscious, it was yet another Western official implying that Africans were unfit to control their wealth, especially the kind that glitters. It wasn't just about Traoré, it was about gold, and that made it about history. For over a century, Africa's gold mines have glittered for foreign empires, British, French, Belgian, and later multinational corporations with no flag but unlimited reach. Burkina Faso itself, though poor by GDP standards, sits atop rich gold deposits that have long been siphoned through foreign-run operations, offering local communities little more than pollution and empty promises. When Traoré came to power, he began reshaping that equation. His transitional government seized control of parts of the gold industry, sidelined corrupt intermediaries, and started redirecting earnings toward military restructuring and local infrastructure. To the U.S., that looked like an autocracy. To Africans, it looked like sovereignty. Langley's remarks, therefore, were never heard in isolation. They were absorbed through a filter of memory, the memory of how Western powers have historically discredited African leaders who nationalize resources. Lumumba in Congo, Sankara in Burkina Faso, Gaddafi in Libya. The same script, it seemed, was playing again. A Western general, fluent in sanitized language, accusing an African leader of mismanaging national wealth, all while ignoring the foreign-backed systems that had long drained those same resources with barely a whisper of accountability. But Traoré's supporters didn't just hear the words, they weaponized them. Within hours of Langley's statement going public, Pan-African pages on TikTok, X, and Instagram turned it into a rallying cry. Edits showed Traoré inspecting military drills, signing agriculture deals, and greeting village elders, all with captions like, "This is where the gold is going." Activists dug up reports of U.S. military spending in Africa, questioning how much of it benefited the continent. A side-by-side meme of Langley in a U.S. Senate chamber and Traoré in a cotton field became symbolic, the suited enforcer versus the soil-born son. Traoré never directly responded. He didn't need to. The silence itself became an act of dignity. And in contrast, Langley's voice grew increasingly shrill. Even after the backlash began, he doubled down, giving follow-up remarks that described the Sahel's realignment as geopolitically dangerous and hostile to democratic norms. Once again, the West's version of democracy was used as a measuring stick, despite widespread African frustration with the electoral systems and regimes it had long propped up. And here's where the narrative twisted. The more Langley criticized Traoré, the more Africa embraced him. In a strange reversal, Langley became the unwilling promoter of Traoré's myth. His criticism gave Traoré visibility beyond West Africa. He was no longer just a captain in fatigues. He was a living symbol of defiance against U.S. overreach. A man who dared to keep the gold in country, dared to cut ties with France, dared to refuse instruction from Washington. Langley's words were supposed to isolate him. They did the opposite. They clarified the sides. It's no coincidence that after those remarks, protests erupted in support of Traoré, not just in Burkina Faso, but across the continent. His image was spray-painted on walls in Kinshasa. His speeches were dubbed in Swahili and broadcast by independent bloggers in Tanzania. His interviews were repackaged with subtitles in Arabic, reaching audiences in North Africa who previously knew little about him. All because one general underestimated the power of words, and more dangerously, misunderstood the emotional intelligence of post-colonial Africa. Langley didn't just insult a leader, he insulted a movement. And in doing so, he didn't discredit Traoré, he canonized him. Which leads us directly to the real powder keg, Kenya's decision to host Langley despite all this, and why it turned Nairobi from a neutral capital into a lightning rod. By the time the chants outside Langley's Nairobi conference echoed through African airwaves, the issue had already transformed. It was no longer just about a general, no longer about Traoré alone. Now, the spotlight had shifted to Kenya itself, a nation suddenly caught between being a symbol of African cooperation or a cautionary tale of compliance. Kenya wasn't new to American alliances. For years, it had maintained warm diplomatic relations with the United States, hosting joint military training exercises, intelligence sharing operations, and participating in counterinsurgency strategies, especially along the Horn of Africa. U.S. defense funding quietly backed major Kenyan security reforms. There were rumors of surveillance installations operating under joint flags. None of this had raised eyebrows until now. Because this time, Kenya had allowed its soil to become the staging ground for a man Africa had already publicly rejected. It didn't help that the defense summit Langley was attending wasn't a multinational gathering. It was a U.S.-designed forum focused on regional security alignment. And in this era of rising Pan-Africanism, alignment sounded less like partnership and more like obedience. For many, Kenya's decision wasn't neutral, it was ideological. Across cafes in Kisumu, dorms in Mombasa, and street corners in Eldoret, the debate exploded. Was Kenya siding with AFRICOM over Africa? On radio talk shows, callers accused the government of inviting the enemy of African sovereignty. Hashtags like "How Kenya is not AFRICOM" and "Traoré Sours" began trending alongside older sentiments of decolonization and unity. And in a region where memories of anti-imperial struggles still echo in song and speech, that mattered. What shocked observers most was the reaction from Kenya's Pan-African voices. A coalition of university professors signed an open letter calling Langley's presence a disgrace to African unity. A well-known Kenyan activist took to national TV and stated, "We cannot, in the same breath, celebrate African independence and host the architect of foreign militarization." Even opposition politicians, normally hesitant to criticize national defense matters, jumped into the fray, some calling for an official explanation from President Ruto's office. But the administration stayed quiet. At first, no clarification, no press statement, no attempt to contextualize Langley's visit or distance itself from his past remarks. That silence became deafening, and for many, it confirmed what they feared, that Nairobi was not just hosting Langley, but validating him. To some, this made sense. Kenya is strategically located, bordering Somalia, South Sudan, and the Indian Ocean. Its military cooperation with the West offers both economic and tactical benefits. Langley's visit promised more defense packages, advanced technology sharing, and possibly even infrastructure aid under military-industrial umbrellas. But the question remained, at what cost? And here's where the betrayal cut deepest. While countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger were pushing out Western forces and reclaiming military autonomy, Kenya appeared to be doing the opposite, pulling them closer. The contrast was jarring. Traoré was being hailed as a liberator. Nairobi's leadership was being accused of submission. And in a continent redefining its alliances, perception was everything. The symbolism became even sharper when Kenyan media aired footage of Langley being escorted through state offices under heavy protection, while outside, protesters were being dispersed with tear gas. That image, played side by side with Traoré walking freely among citizens in Ouagadougou, became a viral metaphor for two African futures, one chained to Western endorsement, the other walking towards sovereign uncertainty. This wasn't just a national embarrassment, it was regional dissonance. East African commentators began questioning whether Kenya was undermining the Pan-African momentum building across the Sahel. Was it positioning itself as the U.S. bridge into Africa's military affairs? Had it become a buffer state for Western interests? Some even likened the situation to Cold War satellite politics. Kenya was no longer just a state. It was now being described as the last polite colony. And yet, not everyone inside Kenya agreed with this condemnation. Government allies defended the visit as diplomatic courtesy. Others pointed to Kenya's history of stability and argued that the country's development relied on global cooperation, not rebellion. One official, anonymously quoted in the Daily Nation, remarked, "We're not here to fight battles started in Ouagadougou, we're here to protect Nairobi." But that only sharpened the divide, because for many across the continent, what happens in Ouagadougou is no longer distant. It's the template of African resistance. And any nation failing to recognize that is seen not as independent, but isolated. In this moment, Kenya stood at a crossroads, not just between two generals, but between two visions of Africa's future. One vision embraced Western funding, international military frameworks, and political stability. The other chose sovereignty at any cost, alliance with new powers like Russia, and a continent-to-continent dialogue free from foreign scripts. And that's when something unusual happened. The backlash didn't just stay on the streets, it reached into Langley's bloodline. From a place he may not have expected, Senegal. Because while Kenya was criticized for playing host, Langley's homeland was about to issue a judgment far more personal. Thousands of miles away from Nairobi, in a small village tucked into Senegal's heartland, a group of elders gathered under a tree, filmed a short video, and shook the very foundation of Langley's authority. These weren't political analysts or opposition figures. These were griots, lineage holders, spiritual guides, the custodians of West Africa's living memory. And they had a message. He has forgotten who he is. It was a rare moment. Africa is no stranger to political drama, but for a U.S. general of African descent to be publicly denounced by his ancestral kin is unheard of. The elders in the video didn't speak in the cold legalese of international diplomacy. They spoke in Wolof and Mandinka, invoking proverbs and history, calling Langley not a commander, but a lost son. "Michael," one elder said solemnly, "you were born from these roots, and now you stand against them." Their condemnation wasn't just cultural, it was moral. To them, Langley's remarks against Captain Traoré were a betrayal not just of one man, but of a generational legacy of struggle. The gold Langley accused Traoré of hoarding wasn't just a resource, it was the very symbol of African sovereignty, something generations of Africans had died to reclaim. And for one of their own, a descendant of that same soil, to speak of it with disdain before a foreign senate, it was too much. They didn't just ask for accountability, they demanded it. "Go to him," another elder urged, referencing Traoré. "Ask for forgiveness, not for politics, but for the dignity of our ancestors." The video went viral in hours. Subtitled in English, French, Arabic, and Swahili, it spread across Pan-African networks with captions like, "The ancestors are watching," and Langley must answer to home. For a continent increasingly animated by spiritual and cultural revival, not just politics, it was a moment heavy with meaning. What made the elder's statement even more powerful was what it wasn't. It wasn't political theater. It wasn't performative nationalism. It was a call from within, a cultural reckoning that pierced through the noise of geopolitical narratives and went straight for the heart. Langley, until this point, had ignored the noise. His stance in Kenya remained stiff and measured, his public language unwavering. But the video from Senegal did what no protest in Nairobi had done. It made him blink. For decades, African Americans in U.S. military institutions have walked a tightrope, navigating loyalty to the uniform and lineage to the homeland. Langley's appointment as the first Black AFRICOM commander had once been celebrated as symbolic progress. But at this moment, identity became in conflict. What happens when heritage and hierarchy collide? His ancestors in Senegal had reminded him, and the world, that identity is not performance, it is a responsibility. And no amount of medals, stars, or Senate commendations can shield a man from the weight of where he came from. And in that sense, the continent's message became louder than ever. Even your bloodline cannot save you when you stand against the people. Langley had crossed a line. And though he tried to backpedal, Africa had already moved on, with or without his remorse. So, if even a U.S. general's ancestral home turned on him, what does this mean for the broader future of African alliances? Who will Africa trust now? Let us know in the comments section who will lead it next. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.